Hey guys, welcome back to True Crime Mystery Wednesday. Chief is obviously in the room right now. There's a dog, there he goes, onto the squeaky futon. There's a dog that's been barking a lot, so he wants to talk to him. He knows that's not allowed, so he comes to me for comfort to try to not bark. So it's gonna be loud in this video. This dog won't shut up, so if you hear it in the background or if you hear Chief walking around, just do your best to ignore it, like I'm gonna try to. So as you can tell from the title of this video, today we are talking about the disappearance of Brandon Lawson from Texas. Now, in doing research for this particular video with this particular disappearance, I did find a little bit of conflicting information, like I'm probably going to find on all of them, but the original statement that's given by the family and the police, it doesn't quite add up. There's a few things that I was really confused about that just didn't sound right until I came across a podcast. It's called the Crawl Space Podcast. I'm gonna link it below. They do an interview with Brandon Lawson's brother Kyle, who is a first-hand source. He was there that night, and he gives a slightly different telling of the events, and it makes a lot more sense. So at first I'm gonna go through what the police said and what the family said, the official play of events, and then we're gonna get into the podcast and the differences that Brandon's brother Kyle states in that video. So Brandon, along with all of his siblings, grew up in Lawson, Texas, where he actually met in high school what would become his common law wife, Ledessa. They met when he was 16 years old and she was 15. When they graduated, they ended up moving together to Fort Worth and eventually to Angelo, Texas. They settled in Angelo with their 4 kids in 2012, and by 2013, Brandon was working as an oil field worker with Renegade Oil Services, and this job really took a toll on the family. Brandon was working a lot of hours, a lot of overtime, and it was just really hard on the whole family in general, and due to this, Brandon had actually just recently passed a drug test to get a new job. It was going to be much more stable, it had more pay, and the hours were significantly better. It was going to really lighten the load on his family and his problems that he had recently been having with his wife. On August 8th of 2013, Brandon returned home to his family, and him and his wife Ledessa got in a big fight. There was just a lot of tension due to his job. They were behind on bills. Their new baby had an ear infection. Just a lot of things were about to boil over, and to top it off, Brandon had not returned home the night before, and Ledessa was very worried about that because he was a recovering drug addict and he had been clean for 6 months, but he had just recently passed a drug test, and knowing that you're in the clear, you know how drug addicts, they can use that as an excuse to go ahead and use again because they know, I passed the drug test, I'm allowed to do it again. And Ledessa was really worried about this, and it just sparked this huge fight. And at 11:53 p.m. Brandon grabbed his wallet, his keys, his phone, and his wall charger and decided to leave. And he was going to drive 3 hours to his father's home, and he called his father to let him know that he was coming, and obviously his dad was okay with this. The dog's barking again. Shush. I can't do anything about the other dog. Obviously his dad said, yeah, that's fine if you need to spend the night here, but call your wife, try and hatch it out, because general marriage advice, if y'all are in a fight, you don't get to just leave for the night. Like, you're married, hash it out, guys. You can't just peace out. I get needing a breather, needing some space, needing to separate from the situation to calm down, but you can't leave for the whole night. That's not an option when you're married. Now, about 7 minutes after Brandon had left the home, Ledessa decided to call Brandon to try and hash things out and get him to come home. And she ended up saying, don't drive 3 hours to Crowley, Texas to be with your dad, because your brother lives 5 minutes away. His brother Kyle lived 5 minutes away from their family's house with his girlfriend and his 4-year-old child. and she was trying to get him to stay with his brother instead of driving the 3 hours. She knew he was low on gas. It just wasn't a good idea. And obviously this conversation didn't go as planned because Ledessa ended up calling Kyle to let him know what was going on and telling him that she was just worried. So Kyle, first of all, Kyle's a great guy. I love Kyle in this story. He just seems like a really great brother. He really, really cares. He ended up driving out to Ledessa's home, checking on her and the kids, making sure everything was okay before returning home, trying to contact Brandon to see what's going on. Now that conversation where he went to Ledessa's home was at 12:10 a.m. and Brandon attempted to call Ledessa at about 12:34 and again at 12:36, but Ledessa did not answer the phone. 2 minutes later, at 12:38, Brandon ended up calling his brother Kyle and letting him know that he was running out of gas and really needed help because he was just stranded on the side of the highway. Kyle then called Ledessa to let her know what was going on, and she said that she was going to leave a gas can, an empty gas can, on the front porch of her home, but she was also going to hook her phone up to the charger, take a shower, and go to bed. She was just done for the night. Kyle and his wife, Audrey, drove to the home, picked up the oil can, and that was at about 12:45 in the morning. They're going to get gas and then meet Brandon at his truck. Now, unfortunately, Kyle's paycheck had not quite gone through yet. It was supposed to go through like any moment in that morning, but it hadn't quite made it into his account yet, so he didn't have the money to put gas in this gas can. So he decided he was just going to drive straight to Brandon, pick him up, and take him to the gas station, which was Stripe's Convenient Mart, which was only about 5 minutes away from where Brandon broke down, which also leads to why didn't Brandon fill up his truck? Because he had passed multiple gas stations at this point on his way away from the home. Why didn't he fill up already? Why did he wait until his car completely broke down on the side of the road and then call for help? Like I said, things kind of just don't really add up in this story. At 12:48, Brandon ended up calling Ledessa again and again. Ledessa does not answer. About 8 minutes after this, Brandon makes a 911 phone call. Now the transcripts and the audio are readily available online. You can just quick Google search, you'll be able to find it. Even on YouTube, there's plenty of videos where you can find this actual audio and listen to it. And this is where things take kind of a really, really weird turn. So the audio, it just sounds like he's not quite there. It sounds like something's going on where Brandon is really just frantic and he's not really making sense. His phone is cutting in and out. You can't really hear what's being said. I'll give you just kind of a brief rundown. So in the audio, he says that he's in a field running towards Abilene and his truck had run out of gas. It kind of sounds like he's saying someone's chasing him, but you can't really tell. He also says that he's bleeding, and the 911 operator asks if he needs an ambulance, and he says yes, and then quickly changes his answer to no, I need the cops. And then eventually he stops responding. The 911 operator is trying to get him to respond, but he's not responding. He's still on the line, but you just kind of hear general commotion in the background until the call ends. Now, it's already really suspicious that he would ask for the cops to be called because he had an outstanding warrant that would allow for his arrest if he had come into contact with cops. So if he was calling the cops, something must have really, really been going on for him to risk being arrested that night. Also, in the audio, it kind of sounds like there's gunshots in the background, and that's also later explained, possibly later in the interview with Kyle that was given on the podcast. But as of right now, like, most people think that it's gunshots. They think that someone must be chasing him and maybe they shot him and maybe this is what's going on, but it's all really, really unclear, really hard to tell from the muddled audio. It's also really unclear if Brandon even really clarified who he was, where he was, so that police would even be able to find him, because he really just says, I'm in a field and I'm running. Like, how are police supposed to find him at this point? It really doesn't quite make any sense. 4 minutes after the 911 call that Brandon makes, another 911 call is made by a trucker. He's passing and he sees a truck parked really haphazardly, very dangerously on the side of the road. It's like in the road, partially crooked, and it's just all kinds of in the way, and it's really a road hazard. So the trucker calls it in for everybody's safety. At about 1:10 in the morning, Kyle and his girlfriend Audrey arrive at the truck, and they arrive pretty much at the same exact time as a Deputy Neal with the Coke County Sheriff Department. He arrives from the opposite direction, and they pull up to the car at the same time, and they begin kind of talking and trying to figure out what's going on. Now, Deputy Neal at this time does not inform Kyle that Brandon had made a 911 call. But like I said earlier, I don't think that he would have informed him, because he does say he's calling to respond to a truck on the side of the road. He doesn't say like someone called for 911 that's bleeding. He doesn't say anything like there's a guy running through a field and I'm here to respond to that. He doesn't say anything about Brandon. He's literally was called there to respond to the truck. And like I said, I don't think there was a connection made by the police department to the truck to Brandon. So they might not have known that they were in the same general area, because I don't think Brandon specified where he was. Now, while driving up, the cop and Kyle are both kind of looking off to the sides of the road, making sure that they don't see any passing cars or suspicious activity or people walking on the side of the road. Neither of them see anything, and Kyle ends up asking if he can kind of go and search for his brother, because at this point he thinks Brandon must be hiding from the cops, because the cops are here, he has a warrant, and he didn't want to snitch out his brother at this point. So he begins making phone calls to Brandon, and Brandon answers one of these phone calls, and this is another thing that really, it changes when you hear Kyle's version, so keep that in mind. They begin talking on the phone, and Brandon says that he's bleeding in a field and he needs them to get to him quickly. And Kyle, this doesn't set off any alarms for Kyle, which is another reason why I think I kind of lean towards, I believe Kyle's interview a little more than the official report, because this really doesn't make sense. Why would a brother not be worried that, you know, Brandon calls, says, I'm bleeding in a field, I need you to get to me quickly, hurry up, and like Kyle doesn't even think anything of it? Like, it just doesn't make sense. At about 1:19, Audrey ends up texting Brandon and saying, quote, hey bro, the cops are at your truck, but he also never responds to this text. At this point, they still haven't really had much luck getting Brandon to respond or to come out to them, and Kyle and Deputy Neal end up discussing why they're there, and Kyle says he's trying to bring the gas to his brother and he doesn't know where he is, and so Deputy Neal ends up doing a quick search of the car, and he finds Brandon's wallet in it. The car is unlocked as well, which is kind of suspicious. Why did he just completely abandon the truck without locking his car? He left his wallet behind. That's just really weird. Due to the car being a very big hazard, being partially in the road, he ends up turning on the hazard lights and locking all the doors, and he calls it in to be towed by a tow truck in the morning. At this point, Deputy Neal doesn't really have anything else he can really do for the situation, so he ends up leaving. He does go up and down the highway a few times trying to look for Brandon on the sides of the roads, but he doesn't see anything, so he ends up just going back to his normal duty. And at this point, once the cop is gone, Kyle thinks, all right, cool, Brandon's gonna come out now. So he goes walking up and down the sides of the roads, screaming for Brandon, telling him to come out, the cops are gone, it's totally fine, you can come out. And he doesn't get any answer, and he begins getting a little bit worried. He's like, what is going on? How come I can't get him to answer? And he calls a few friends. They do like a mini search of the area, still not finding any signs of Brandon. Kyle and the friends that came out to help search ended up calling off the search at about 3 in the morning because Brandon's phone ended up going straight to voicemail. So it was either turned off or it had run out of battery. At this point, Kyle ends up leaving, but he leaves the gas can in the bed of the truck and ends up yelling out to Brandon one last time, hey, I'm leaving the gas can in your truck so that you can come home, like, whenever you're ready. And he ends up leaving with plans of coming back that morning to fill up the gas can and figure out what's going on. At this point, he does call Ledessa to let her know what's going on, but leaves her a message because at this point she's already asleep, and she does not get the message until about 4:30 in the morning. Now, Ledessa immediately begins getting really worried. She does not know what's going on. She knows that Brandon has not been found, and she's just very worried about him at this point. So at 5 in the morning, she ends up calling the police department and just asking if there have been any process if anyone's found Brandon, what's going on, and there were no updates. Nobody had seen Brandon yet. Nobody knew where he was still. At 7 a.m., Kyle ends up coming back to the location, searching for Brandon some more, getting some gas into the truck, and a tow truck ended up coming at about 8:30 or 9 o'clock to tow the truck away. And Deputy Neal, knowing that no progress had been made, Brandon was still not found, ends up coming back to the location, and he does a more thorough search. He's going to homes in the location, searching all of the land, trying to find any signs that he might be there or signs of possible break-ins, seeing if he broke into anywhere at this point. He's just looking for any sign that a person was out there in the field at night, and he doesn't find anything. Now at this point, everyone really starts getting worried that knows Brandon, because this is so uncharacteristic of him. Even though he had a fight with Ledessa, he still would have called home to update everybody on where he is. He would have called somebody, but it's been complete radio silence at this point. He hasn't contacted anybody, and everyone's just getting really, really worried, and Kyle ends up just feeling so guilty that he never told the cops about the phone calls that he had and about Brandon saying someone was, that he was bleeding, he was in the middle of a field, and he just feels so guilty that he ends up going to the police and telling them about the phone call and the last contact that he had with his brother. And this naturally leads the police to being very suspicious of Kyle. They're like, why didn't you tell us this last night when we could have helped, when we could have done something? And obviously Kyle felt bad, but he's like, I couldn't snitch on my brother. I thought he was just hiding from the cops. Like, it's not. And it really started this unrest between Kyle and the police. 2 days later, on August 11th of 2013, the police conduct a small search of the area, just a 4-hour search, and they're unable to turn up any leads, any signs that Brandon's there, and they decide that Brandon most likely was no longer in Coke County. They believe that he went to the highway since his truck was out of gas and hitched a ride with somebody out of town. Now, Brandon's family does not agree with this. They're very upset that the police have come to this conclusion. They don't think that this is characteristic of Brandon. It doesn't make any sense to them, but you can kind of see from the police's standpoint why this would make sense. They think that, it's a sober guy who ran out of gas and he's trying to get gas, so he hitched a ride out of town, and maybe something happened, maybe there was foul play on the way out of town, but he's no longer in Coke County. Melinda McCutcheon, who is the wife of Sheriff Wayne McCutcheon of the Coke County Police Department, she actually is a publisher, and she published a short article with the information about Brandon Lawson's disappearance, and it had the information that the police had at the time, where they believed he was no longer in Coke County. They didn't see any signs of him. Maybe he hitched a ride with a motorist. People keep an eye out, see if you can see him or anything, but he's most likely not in the direct area that he went missing. This was published in the Observer Enterprise, just a publication that's a local thing for this town. And the family, again, was very upset with this publication. They thought that it was just misleading because they didn't agree with the police at this point. And this points to some people thinking that maybe the police were involved, maybe the sheriff was involved. I don't agree with this, because when you look at all the facts from the case from a removed standpoint, and you're seeing someone ran out of gas, was in the area, and then we couldn't find them, and there's no sign of them in the area, most likely you're going to think they got a ride somewhere. They got out, they left, and I know why the family is upset about this. I know that why they don't want to accept this. They don't think that that's what happened. I also don't think that that's what happened, but that's taking into other things into account. But this is just the information the police had at this moment. So I understand where they're coming from. I don't think that they were wrong for publishing this. And y'all know I have no issues with pointing out when I think cops are dirty, as evidenced in the Candace Hiltz video. But this one, I'm on the side of the cops. I think that they did what was right. They had given the information that they had available at the time. On August 12th of 2013, Ledessa ended up getting the records to Brandon's phone and made the discovery that he had called 911 at this point, and his entire family was in an outrage, clearly. I completely understand that as well. They were very upset that the cops had not made them aware of this fact. Now, like I said, I'm not sure if the cops really knew or made the connection between the frantic phone call that Brandon made to 911 and the abandoned truck on the side of the road. I've already kind of made that clear. I don't know why, like, how they could have made that connection. I do see, like, how the family would be upset, and they should have known, and they should have said something, and they should have conducted the search and told the family. And Kyle said if he knew that Brandon had made a 911 call, that he would have easily, very readily told the cops, hey, I got this phone call and he's bleeding in a field, he's near here, let's go look for him. But they didn't know, and they're very upset about this fact, which I fully understand. LaDessa then ends up filing a missing persons report on August 13th of 2013, and she ends up hiring one private investigator by the name of Paula Boudreau, I think, Boudreau, something like that, it's very French. And also Texas Ranger Nick Hanna. She hired both of these people to conduct aerial searches to try and find Brandon. Meanwhile, LaDessa led a group of people on the ground trying to search for Brandon, any signs of blood, anything that they could find that might point their way to him. Now, an issue with this investigation is it was just a bunch of private citizens, and the land that they were searching, there was a lot of private property, and the landowners in that area did not really want a lot of people coming into their private property that they didn't know. They didn't have any police warrants or anything like that, and the family's upset that they weren't granted access to these private lands, but at the same time, I fully understand where the landowners are coming from. To me, like, I understand why private landowners would not want a group of people to come into their private land without a warrant, without police escort, without anything. They're just doing it on their own. I know that they were just trying to find their family member who had gone missing, but I can see it from the landowner's point of view as well. Like, come back with the police, you know, the guy's missing, get the police to come out. Like, I can see why they wouldn't grant them access. On August 16th, roughly a week after Brandon's disappearance, the police finally came forward and did a full investigation, including aerial coverage, infrared lights, tracking dogs, everything they had at their expense, they were putting towards trying to find Brandon in this investigation. They did not come up with any leads, anything new, anything suggesting that he was even in the area or had been in the area the previous night. On August 29th, a larger scale search was conducted, and this involves a lot of different places, including the Coke County Sheriff's Department, the Texas Rangers, Tom Green County Sheriff's Department, Highway Patrol, as well as search and rescue. It covered over 2,500 acres of land, and again, this turned up nothing new. There were still no leads, nothing found even suggesting he had been in the area. After this second search, LaDessa ended up taking her 4 kids and moving back home to Fort Worth, Texas to be closer to family. They were really struggling financially at this point after hiring the private investigator and the Texas Ranger to do the aerial searches, and now they don't have Brandon's income because he's still missing. And they were still, you know, having to pay for just the basics of survival, for their home and food and just everything. It was just getting to be too much, so they ended up having to move home to be supported by family until they could get back up on their feet again. Subsequent searches were performed by the police departments in October 24th of 2013, as well as 3 more in the early months of 2014. Still, nothing new was learned. After this, LaDessa ended up launching a Facebook group called Help Find Brandon Lawson, and I'll leave a link below. The family also launched a website called Missing Brandon Lawson, and it has all the information from the case, everything that you could need to just gain more insight into this case and what happened that night, and just a timeline of events, all on that website. I'm also going to link that below as well. A few months after Brandon went missing, Kyle became a #1 suspect for the police. Like I said, there was just a lot of tension between the police and Kyle because he had openly admitted that he had hidden information from them, so they're automatically just suspicious of him. So they bring him in for questioning, and Kyle immediately is like, look, I know what's going on, hook me up to a polygraph, I want a polygraph test. Immediately they hook him up to these polygraph machines, and they're asking him, did you give him a ride? Did you take him out of town? And then the questions start taking a turn. They start asking, you know, did you get in a fight with Brandon? Were you angry at each other? Did you accidentally hurt him? Did you accidentally do something? Do you know any information that you have not given us? And Kyle responds very honestly to all of these questions. He passes with flying colors. He does not know anything else. Since then, there has been no progress, no new updates on this case. There's a couple of theories that maybe some people found him on the side of the road and tried to rob him, which wouldn't make sense because his wallet was still in his car. There's a theory that Kyle actually is still involved, but that, I mean, he passed the polygraph, but polygraphs are notoriously wrong. Like, even if I was 100% innocent, I'm not taking a polygraph because I have anxiety and I know that thing's gonna register as a lie. Like, no thanks. They're notoriously wrong. That's why they're not used in police settings. But I believe Kyle. I do believe in his story. I believe Kyle 100%. But just saying, like, that's why the theory is out there. There's another theory that he was killed by wild boars in the area. I don't quite believe that because boars don't just go out of their way to, like, kill somebody. The police still think that Brandon did leave the area that night. Since they have done all of these searches, they say that they would have found some signs or at least his body by now. They have done thorough searches and they have found absolutely nothing. So they think that he did just leave town, and his family does not believe this. They're very angry with the police department. They do not agree with the police department. They say that he had a new job on the horizon. He had a wife and 4 kids, and even though they were, you know, fighting, things were looking up, and he was recently clear of drugs, and it was just, to them, that doesn't make sense. Now, that's the end of the police reports and what the family is willing to come forward and say. Now, like I said, there was an interview, very credible source, given by Kyle himself. He was there that night. He had all the phone calls. He knows what he's talking about. And I believe this podcast has it correct because they did not seek Kyle out for interview. They did not pay him for this interview. Kyle looked for them, got in contact with them because he wants to get his story out there. He said the police won't listen to his story now because they're suspicious of him. They don't believe him. So he just wanted to get his story and his timeline out to the public. Now, this podcast was published on April 4th of 2019. This is very new information, and I'm gonna link the podcast down below so that you can actually listen to the interview yourself and see. Let's go ahead and go through his timeline of events and how they differ from the official police reports and families' records of that night. 2 days before the disappearance, Brandon apparently called Kyle and told him he was going to get high. He was going to go search out meth, he was going to smoke it, and he wanted to have a good time because he just passed a drug test. And if you know anything about drug addicts, I don't know anyone personally, but I've done a lot of research on like cold cases and just general crimes, and I kind of have a basis understanding of drug addicts, and just recently passing a drug test can be a trigger in itself. He was clean for 6 months and he was working towards a goal. Once that goal passed, he didn't really have anything past that to tell him like specifically, no, you can't do this. So he thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and just have a little bit. He didn't want to go crazy, but he did want to party and celebrate that he was getting this new job. Now, Kyle said he told Brandon that that was not a good idea. He was just recently clean, like he didn't need to do this, and like he should just avoid it. But Brandon was dead set, and he was like, no, look, I'm doing this whether you do it with me or not. And Kyle was like, all right, you know, go ahead, just be safe, call me when you get home tonight, just be okay. Brandon said that he was going to go out with his friend Chris to get the meth, and he would call him later that night. And Brandon ends up not calling Kyle later that night, and Kyle in the morning calls Brandon, no answer, and he called LaDessa. There was also no answer, so he goes on the search. He goes calling all the friends and family, trying to figure out where Brandon is, and he ends up finding him. He is in his hometown, Fort Worth. and he crashed on a friend's couch after getting really high the night before. And Kyle is telling him, dude, you need to get home. Like, you're gonna be in trouble. Come home. Ledessa's gonna be pissed. Like, just, you need to get home. Brandon's like, yeah, I'm coming, whatever. But then he says, make sure Ledessa hasn't touched any of my things or broken any of my things. And Kyle is like, all right, I'm assuming that probably has happened before, where Ledessa got really angry at Brandon and broke some of his things. So Kyle ends up going to Ledessa's house and checking to make sure everything's okay. She's just cleaning the house, doing regular things, and she's upset that Brandon didn't come home that night. And Kyle ends up calling Brandon, letting him know, hey, like, everything's fine, but here's Ledessa. Gives her the phone, and they get in a fight. Brandon and Ledessa are already yelling at each other, very angry. Kyle ends up getting his phone back and going back home. Hours later, Brandon and Kyle's mother ends up calling Kyle and being like, hey, you need to go over to Brandon's house. Apparently, Brandon and Ledessa were in another huge fight, screaming at each other, a really, really bad one. So he needed to go and, like, calm everything down. So Kyle gets in his car. This is why I love Kyle. Like, he was such a good brother. He gets in his car, goes back to the house. At this time, Brandon has already left. He's already grabbed his things and said he's going to his dad's home. Then Brandon calls Kyle and he's saying Ledessa had the Mexicans in the neighborhood run him out of town. And he said one got pulled over by a state trooper, but there's still two after me. And Kyle did not believe this. He was like, okay, sure, whatever you say. Ledessa also says that this was not a thing. This never happened. Nobody chased him out. He grabbed his things willingly and just left the house. Kyle said that they didn't even know any Mexicans in the neighborhood, so it just didn't quite make sense. And Kyle decided in that moment, Brandon was still high as a kite. Brandon was still reacting to meth. He still had it in his system, and at this point, he was saying stuff that wasn't even true. He was just too high to really understand what was going on. And that's where Kyle started getting really just overall just tired but worried, and he's like, all right, let's figure out what to do. After this phone call, Brandon calls Kyle again, but this time he's saying he's running out of gas. He's gonna have to pull over on the side of the road, and he needs Kyle to bring him gas. And that's where Kyle tells Ledessa, hey, he needs gas. Ledessa leaves the gas can out for him, and she goes to bed. On the way to go and pick up Brandon, Kyle says that Brandon continually called him over and over, and they were all very, like, incoherent, just a couple of words, and then he would hang up. He would maybe ask, like, where are you? And they would say, like, I'm around the corner, I'm not far away, and he'd hang up. Sometimes it was just completely incoherent. You couldn't tell what he was saying, and then he would hang up. So Kyle just knows he's really, really high at this point. At one point, Audrey ends up picking up the phone, and Brandon says, I'm bleeding, I'm sitting in a field, can you guys just hurry up, you're taking too long. And that's where the whole bleeding thing comes into context. It wasn't while he was talking to Deputy Neal. It happened beforehand. It also wasn't Kyle that was on the phone. It was Audrey talking to Brandon. So I can see why this wouldn't cause any concern. He probably thought he got a scratch on the arm and he was bleeding very minor. He's sitting in a field for some reason. Like, what is he doing? Kyle also said during this time, during all these phone calls, you could tell that sometimes he was standing still and sometimes he was just, like, running for no reason. There was no, like, reason that he would be running. He's just running and, like, where are you guys? Okay, bye. And he would hang up. Like, how, it just was weird. Dude was high as a kite. At some point during all of this, Brandon had called 911, and that also explains why it was kind of incoherent, why it didn't really make sense. Brandon again calls Kyle, asking where he is, and Kyle's like, dude, I'm pulling up to your truck, where are you? He gets out of the truck, and Brandon says that he can see him, but Kyle's like, dude, I don't see you. Like, where are you? Come to the truck. And then he sees the headlights coming towards him, and it's Deputy Neal. And at this point, Brandon on the phone says, one time, run. And one time is slang for cops. Like, it's the cops, run, get out of there. And Kyle is like, I haven't done anything wrong. Why would I run? Like, no, I'm here, I'm not doing anything wrong. Why would I run? And at this point, Brandon says, where's your pride, mother effer? And hangs up the phone. Which kind of made me laugh. Like, he's high out of his mind. Like, he doesn't know what's going on. He's like, what's wrong with you? It's really sad. So at this point, things kind of start lining up again. He says that he talks to Deputy Neil and just tells him he's bringing his brother the gas because he ran out of gas, but he doesn't know where he is. And Neil apparently did not actually search the car. He just opened the door, saw the wallet, locked the doors, and turned on the hazards to make it a hazard. But he didn't fully search the car. So at this point, Kyle knows that Brandon is not being chased by anyone, because if he's just standing just out of eyesight and he's watching them interact with the cops, he clearly wasn't actually being chased. He's watching them. He's standing still. He said that he wasn't running at this point, and like on the phone call earlier, sometimes he'd be standing still, sometimes he'd be running in the field. Like, it was just a really weird situation. So then Kyle begins talking to Deputy Neil, just filling him in, like, yeah, my brother, he ran out of gas, but I don't know where he is now. That also I would understand why Deputy Neil would not be worried about foul play. He wouldn't be worried about anything, because all he knows at this point is someone ran out of gas and now they're not here anymore. So most likely they hitched a ride and went to a gas station. All is fine. At this point, Kyle ends up doing a search. He's trying to yell for Brandon to come out, like, it's fine, come to me, like, oh, I got you, but there's no response at all. He doesn't hear anything. And at this point, Kyle actually had his kid in the car because him and his wife were there, or girlfriend at the time, and their kid was in the car. They didn't have a babysitter while all this was going on, and the kid ends up getting really hungry, and at this point, his money had gone into his account from his paycheck, so he's like, you know what, let's go get food. We'll fill up the gas can, fill up the truck with gas. So he goes and gets his kid food and fills up the gas can, and he ends up picking up Chris because Chris was the guy that Brandon had gotten high with the night before. So he was like, yo, come on, like, help me find him. He's somewhere out here hiding in the bushes from the cops. I don't know. He's just, you know, he's tweaking. Like, he's gone. So let's go look for him. They do a search. This is also where it kind of changes from the story. He said he was out searching until well into the day. He was searching until like 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. He didn't just leave at 3 in the morning. He was searching for a long time, left to get food and gas and Chris, and then came straight back. Like, he was out all night. So after this, he just puts $5 of gas into the truck tank. He said he doesn't even know if the truck was even out of gas. He thinks that Brandon was just high and he didn't understand. He just pulled off the side of the road and left. So he puts the $5 of gas into the truck and he yells out, there's gas in your truck, the law's gone now. So he's trying to get him to come out again. Again, no answer, so he ends up going home at that point. He said the truck ended up getting towed about 8:30 or 9 o'clock, just like the original story. But he also said the police never officially searched the truck because they weren't suspicious of foul play in any way. Like they said, they thought that he had hitched a ride and gotten out of town. They also kind of thought that maybe he was just starting over. Maybe he just left his family. They didn't know, but they knew that he wasn't in Coke County. Eventually, Ledessa ended up getting the truck out of the impound after a few days. The police never looked at the truck at all, and she ended up selling it back to the person that they had bought the truck from in the first place. Kyle also said that when he finally went to the police to tell them about the phone calls in the car the day before, that's where they did get really suspicious. They started treating him like a suspect. He didn't really like it. He was just very upset about the whole situation. He said that he was super guilty about the whole thing. And he said if he had known that Brandon had called 911, of course he would have told the cops. But at that point, he didn't want to snitch out his brother to the cops. He was going to get arrested if he did, and in his mind, it wasn't worth it at that point. He thought Brandon was just hiding in the bushes somewhere. He didn't know that anything bad had happened. Now, at this point in the interview, they did ask Kyle if they thought that Brandon had smoked. Brandon replied that he does, quote, know for a fact that he was high on it, talking about Brandon and methamphetamines. He also said that at one point Brandon had overdosed on meth before, and when he overdosed on it, he said there was some kind of change that switched in his brain to where when he took meth after that, he started acting way different than he had before the OD. And that could have possibly been part of the reason why he was acting so weird and incoherent. Kyle also said that the gunshot noises that people were hearing in the 911 call were not gunshot noises. He said he knows for a fact that Brandon was really close to the bridge that goes over the Colorado River, and when you go over that river, the seams, you know, when your car like makes a sound when it goes over seams in a bridge, he said that's what the sound was. It was just a car going over the bridge. There were no gunshots. Like he said, he did not believe anyone was chasing Brandon. He does not think that Mexicans chased him out of town. He doesn't believe in any of that. So he said he is sure it was just a car going over the river. He also said he knows that Brandon wasn't being chased because of him standing still and just watching him talk to the officer, and the way that he said, "Where's your pride, mother effer?" Like, obviously he was kind of joking around, like he wasn't in a serious, deadly situation at this point. He obviously wasn't bleeding from a gunshot wound or anything. He was just having fun. Like, where's your pride? You know, like, come on, let's run. Like, what are you doing? You know, he's just trying to have a good time because he was high. He didn't understand what was going on. They also asked him about the wild boar in the area, and while Kyle said that he had never actually seen wild boars, he does know that they were out there, and he also said that he does not think that Brandon was attacked and killed by the boars, because the boars in that area, they're going to run from you. They're not going to stand there and charge somebody at random. They're not going to just try and attack a person for no reason. So he does not think that Brandon was killed by a boar. Now, what Kyle officially thinks happened to Brandon is he thinks that Brandon, while he was out there just having a good time, high as a kite on meth, he thought that eventually he was met with foul play. Somebody saw him, somebody may have just seen him running around or something, but he thinks that somebody went out and killed him, because he couldn't have just OD'd and died in a field. Because of all the searching, they would have found his body. Like, it doesn't make sense. He wouldn't have just OD'd and died in the field. Somebody would have come across him at some point. So he does think that he was met with foul play. He does think that somebody killed him and disposed of the body in a different area. Now, on what I think happened, unfortunately, my theory is different. I think that Brandon was very high, was not fully understanding of his situation. He was clearly having meth-induced psychosis. I think he was hallucinating, even though Kyle claims he did not hallucinate on meth. When he was taking meth, he didn't hallucinate. I think he was, at least at this point. And a part of why I think this is, like, even if he didn't normally hallucinate on it, he had been clean for 6 months. And what a really big issue, why a lot of people, a lot of addicts will OD after going clean. They'll be clean for a while, and then the next time they try, they take way too much and they'll OD. Is because when you take drugs, you build up a certain kind of tolerance to it. So after a while, you're going to be taking more and more and more to get the same kind of effect. Once you've been clean for so long, your tolerance level will go down, but a lot of the drug addicts, while they're taking it, they're going to try and take the same amount that they did when they were at their peak tolerance level, and that ends up being far too much, and it'll cause them to OD. I don't think that Brandon OD'd. I don't think he had that much, but I do believe he had more than he should have. I think it brought on a meth-induced psychosis. I thought he was fully hallucinating, and I think that when he decided to run from the cops, they were very close to the Colorado River, and what I think happened is he was just running, not paying attention, high, and ran into the river, and I think he drowned. And I think that's why they can't find his body. I think he's either in the river or his body got completely swept out and it's somewhere else. Maybe it's even an unidentified body somewhere that was found along the river. I don't know. I just feel like he fell into the river and drowned. I think that's what happened. I don't think it was foul play. I don't think he was met with any kind of violence. I don't think anyone was chasing him. I think that he was just unfortunately succumbed to his addiction, and it's so sad because everything was looking up for him, and it's just a really tragic story. And I understand why his family won't admit to themselves. They haven't told the cops, they haven't told the public that Brandon was high, because they're trying to protect his reputation. They don't want people to think that he went out and was just high and was just another druggie. And like, it doesn't matter if he was high or not. we should find him regardless. It shouldn't matter to anybody if he was on drugs or if he was on alcohol or if he was completely stone cold sober. They still deserve to be found. They deserve the same exact respect and the same amount of effort to find their bodies or these people. And I see why they were trying to protect their reputation, especially for their kids. One day, the kids are gonna ask what happened to their dad. And you don't want them to be like, well, honey, he was high on meth and we don't know what happened. Like, you want to try and protect that for his children and for his family, and maybe it'll bring more people to try and search for him. And it's just really sad that we're in that point as a society. Like, we just kind of push drug addicts to the side, kind of like last week's video when I was talking about the redhead murders. A lot of the women that were being murdered were homeless or hitchhikers or people that were just victims of their circumstance, and I consider drug addicts to be in that same field where they are victims of their circumstance. It is an addiction, it is an illness, and yeah, while it is their choice to start taking drugs, like, you can't blame a drug addict for becoming a drug addict, and they deserve all the same respect as everybody else. And it's just so sad that he was clean for 6 months and he was just about to start a new job and his family life was looking up, and it's just so sad. So what do y'all think of this case? Do you think he was met with foul play? Do you disagree with my take on it? Like I said, I always encourage everybody to do your own research on it. Go listen to the audio of the 911 call. See if you agree with me. Listen to the podcast of Kyle's interview. Do your own research. Go to the website and the Facebook group and look into everything yourself and get back to me with what your theories are. I look forward to hearing from you, and I will see y'all next week for another True Crime Mystery Wednesday. See you then.